Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, as you all know by now, the tagline of this podcast is technology works best when it brings people together. And if we've learned anything from life in 2020, it's that the world is changing and sustainable business is good business. And I think we're finally starting to think bigger and daring to tackle the big questions in life, such as how can technology for good help improve the world and meet sustainability goals? And how can tech for good transform the world, helping to tackle inequality, fight climate crisis, improve healthcare and poverty, and so much more. And also, of course, how tech can be good for business and the planet. It's not a binary choice to either make profit or do good. Business can actually make profit by doing good. And all of these topics that I've just mentioned are very close to the heart of Marga Hoek. And she's on a mission to make business and capital for good become the norm. And she is a former CEO and now international thought leader on sustainability, on sustainable business and capital. She's a Thinkers 50 member, not to mention an award-winning author of bestsellers The $1 Trillion Shift and New Economy Business. But enough scene setting for me. Buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to Amsterdam so we can speak with Marga now. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Well, thanks for inviting me. It's lovely to join on your podcast. My name is Marga Hoek, and I am a 3-time CEO, and currently I'm a board member of many international companies. And I am proud to say that I can call myself a thought leader on sustainable and innovative business, as was acknowledged by the Thinkers 50. So I am what you could say a thinker, but also still a business leader.
And one of the reasons I invited you on the podcast today is because, yes, you are an award-winning CEO, TED speaker, author, and advisor to the Bank of Montreal, Earth Capital, and Green IT. But I'm curious, what was it that put you on this path, and what inspired you to explore using tech for good?
I think that's two phases. So first, throughout my CEO career, I noticed that actually your company thrives if you engage with sustainability. And to give you a brief example from that time, I noticed that as a CEO of a construction company, we had all these construction sites. And then I saw that we had to pay to actually take off all the leftovers and garbage, we called it garbage back then, from our construction sites. And that cost me money. And then I thought, one, I don't want to ditch everything that's being left over or is wrong or anything, or is taken out. But I want to solve that. And second, why should I pay money for materials for another person to get them? So I started a company, a resources company, so to say, that made the process circular. And guess what? That resources company that just took away materials and entered them into the production cycle again, because many things were just usable, like metals or stones or anything else. And that company became extremely profitable with a low risk. And like you can imagine, the construction sector makes little profit, has very low margins. So that was very favorable on our total bottom line. And that was just business sense for me, but also it gave me such a better feeling that I wasn't creating a lot of garbage, but I was actually reusing things. And that is a small example from that time, but that caught me. And then I thought, okay, in my leadership roles, I can make a difference, and I can also lift my company out of the price competitive market. Because if you're in the construction sector, it's just little margins and competition on price. So I thought, if my company knows a lot about sustainability, a lot about innovative ways to reuse materials, to create renewable energy in buildings, etc., that must be interesting for clients, and we must be able to get different kinds of contracts than we did before, and thus make better profit. And so we did. And of course, like I mentioned it now, it sounds pretty easy, and why not do that? And of course, we had a lot of hurdles, and it wasn't as easy as I say now, but it did work out. And by initiatives like that, and later on also connecting to all kinds of sectors, like the finance sector you just mentioned, because, if people have lower costs of living because they have a well-isolated house and they have renewable energy, their living costs go down. So I could give them better conditions in their mortgage, for instance. So it became broader and broader and broader. And the company did really well. And further down, I did that for other companies as well. And I noticed that the companies I worked for were more successful, but also I was so proud myself because I was combining to do something good, or at least better for the world. And I was leading my company financially in a good way. And so I became more and more motivated to do that and did bigger and bigger initiatives. And at some point, I was asked by the government to take the lead of a new initiative called the Sustainable Business Association, meaning that the government supported the idea to join up companies that are progressively sustainable, because then they could have another dialogue with them, and they saw it was very important to support this group of companies because they, in fact, are the future, So I did that, and I led that association for, I think, around 8 years, very successfully. We had 240 companies joining, and really a lot of investments going into consortia, etc. And at some point, I thought, I've done it all, I've seen it all. I wouldn't really work internationally. And then I stepped into my next phase, doing the roles you just mentioned, doing non-executive board roles for different companies, writing books. I write for many media like Fortune and so forth. And before Corona, I was a speaker around the world physically, and nowadays I do that digitally. That's about to sum it up.
I love that story, though, because it also led to you working with the UN and about their sustainability goals. I mean, is that something can you share that experience and what you learned there?
Yes, a lot. Of course, I liaised with the United Nations, and I worked together with Paul Polman. And Paul Polman was the designated person from the business community who was chairing a lot of business roundtables in order to get agreement and the definitions on these sustainable development goals. And this was a process of actually many years. And of course, I didn't intensify throughout the process. And yeah, there's some things that are interesting to share, I think. So before we had the sustainable development goals, we had the millennial goals. I don't know if you know that. And the millennial goals focused on poverty, food. So the really, really basic needs of people like we used to call in third world countries, so in developing countries. And it was successful at that. Really, millions of people were lifted out of poverty. People actually don't know that. They think, oh, these millennial goals, we didn't hear much of them, won't be very good. But actually, it was effective. But it was effective mainly in the government world and in the NGO world, because they really engaged. And you can understand this from the point that these millennial goals focused actually on social needs. But in that period, we weren't aware so much of things like climate change, or we weren't aware of the plastic soup, or we weren't aware of the fact that actually climate change and poverty are tightly connected and all those things. So the process to come to the Sustainable Development Goals was an interaction between government, NGOs, and business. Business sat at the table, and I think it helped a lot, because business knows, I think more than any other party, that you can only work with targets or goals or objectives if they're really smart. Because otherwise, what are you going to send your company to department XYZ to contribute to something if you don't have real KPIs and you can connect them to your company's KPIs. So business really brought that in. 17 goals is a lot, but On the other hand, it's really concrete. I always call it the definition of sustainability nowadays. If you want to be sustainable, you have to address at least 3-4 of those goals. I call these sustainable development goals like the moral compass of the world. Yeah. And for the business world, it is a compass, because in those 17 goals, we have all the challenges in the world, how to solve the plastic soup problem, how to make sure that people are lifted out of poverty, to make sure that women and girls in this world have the rights they are supposed to do, how we clean up our oceans and prevent coral reefs and many fish to disappear, etc., etc. Everything is in there. And you know what is amazing is that it's one language for the world. And people sometimes don't realize this, how big of an achievement that is. It's a united set of 70 goals with underlying objectives and targets that are completely the same anywhere in the world, any country, any person, any nationality, or any role you might have in society and business. They're the same for everybody. And that is an amazing achievement, because before, for instance, in the financial world, if you said, oh, we want to green our investments, yeah, what the hell did we mean, you know? And everybody had a different definition. And then we said, well, we can't do it because there's different definitions. Of course, there's implementation problems, and I won't make it sound like it's easy, because it's not, but at least we have no discussion about what are the things to solve in the world, how are they defined, and which targets lie underneath. That's all clear, crystal clear, everybody. And 169 companies at that time, in 2016 we're talking about, signed on these sustainable development goals. Can you imagine? You know how hard it is for every climate meeting we have, every COP, to agree on climate change or to agree on the measures to take. But 169 countries signed off on this. So that is an amazing progress.
It really is. And on a similar topic, of course, I think it's worth highlighting that you did a TED Talk last year. Can you tell me more about your experience doing that TED Talk and also what you spoke about?
Well, I do loads of TED Talks, but this one was special to me because it was in a beautiful church. And TED Talks I like very much because they make you tell a huge story, but just in 15 minutes. Yeah. Or 20 minutes. This one was a bit longer, I think. And what I try to do in many of my keynotes, but in this TED Talk especially because of the atmosphere, you know, is making people aware where we are in the world and at this time, and make them conscious of what is going on. But then also, after that, once they realize that, give them perspective, because we all need perspective and solutions. So I also give them loads of concrete cases of companies that changed the world for the better whilst performing good financially as well. But I start these keynotes also to get people out of their everyday mood, so to say. So, for instance, sometimes I tell them, and this is daunting to me, to myself still always, is if you realize that the whole planet, do you know how old the planet is? How long does Earth exist, you think?
No, oh, wow. I couldn't begin.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Well, it is around 4.5 billion years. So if you would close your eyes, and take a blank piece of paper and you would draw a line representing 4.5 billion years. Yeah. And then after that, underneath, you draw a small line representing 125,000 years only. That is how long, and you have different numbers, but that's not the point now. More or less, how long people exist. So on a long line that the Earth has existed, was beautiful, was untouched. It's just a tiny bit there. Humans came in. Yeah. And then of that time, it's only around 220 years, which is tiny, 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 when the Industrial Revolution started. Imagine how little time we actually needed to mess up the world that was grown in 4.5 billion years.
Wow, I've never thought about it like that, but it's so true, isn't it?
It is. And do you know that, for instance, another thing, that 1 minute of the sun, of the power of the sun, so the power of the sun that comes to Earth, is worth, or it equals, 2 years of all the fossil energy we use around the globe.
No, wow.
And I don't say that to depress people or anything else, but to make aware that saying we cannot change things or, well, it always went well, are very untrue.
Yeah.
Because actually we have been here for a very short period, industrializing, meaning that, of course, we invented gas and energy and production around the world, traveling around the world, etc. Yeah, that brought a lot of prosperity, but in a tiny bit, we also threatened the whole planet that has been there more or less forever. And yeah, that sinks in, that thought. And I also share, this I didn't do the last TED Talk because that was pre-corona, but that it's unimaginable that the planet recovers that quickly. So that's the upside. So we've seen throughout corona, because we didn't travel, because we didn't fly, because fabrics were closed, that, for instance, rivers in India that were the most polluted ones in the world, and they were absolutely dangerous in terms of health because of all the chemicals that were thrown in there, for the first time were clear with good water quality. We saw the water in harbors clear up. We could breathe again in Asia. Well, no doubt you know many examples as well yourself.
Yeah.
So that teaches us, okay, guys, we have been here for a very brief period of time. We messed up really quickly, but if we stop messing up, the planet can recover. And yeah, that is one of my biggest wishes. On the upside, sorry to jump from one topic to another, but it's one of my biggest wishes that people do realize throughout this coronavirus that changing behavior can have enormous impact indeed.
It really can. And that's why I find your work so inspiring. And of course, when you're not doing these keynotes, working with the UN, etc., you've also interviewed many prominent CEOs all over the world. So I'm curious, what did you learn from these conversations? Is there a real thirst for change and making a difference out there?
Yeah, of course. Let's be honest. The amount of leaders that are really what I call sustainable and responsible leaders, and that know what approach is needed to put impact on the world first, there are not that many.
Yeah.
And for me, the ultimate leader thinks as follows. So the regular leader has a company. The majority of CEOs think, okay, I have this company, it's producing XYZ, and I see what they do. How can I make that a little bit more sustainable? Or how can I prevent to do more harm or decouple growth and impact, what they call. The real impact-driven leader turns things completely around. He starts with the challenges of the world as they are presented in the Sustainable Development Goals and thinks, okay, these are the things that need solving. If I deliver products and services, whatever you do, that have a positive impact on these challenges, I'm part of the solution. And then no doubt I can work this out in a way that is beneficial for my investors, shareholders, financially. Those kinds of leaders are the ones we need, because that is the only way that you can ensure that you have maximum impact. The other way around doesn't start with impact, but you do what you did and you'll get what you got just a little bit better, and that won't do it.
Love that. And one thing that I am noticing as well, of course, is the world has changed dramatically in the last 6 months, and even more so since you gave that TED Talk last year. So what kind of challenges do you think entrepreneurs are going to face in this post-pandemic world after the crisis?
I think, of course, new entrepreneurs, that is a good position to be in when things change rapidly. So new entrepreneurs that are innovative, and we have a lot of millennials, generation XYZ, that have very innovative, very technology-driven businesses and solutions, and they start with the end in sight,
Yeah.
So they are very well positioned. If you are a large company, listed company that already has huge investments that you count on being profitable for a number of years, and the longer ago those investments were done, the more you're focused on maximizing profit, that is how it works. So, for instance, an energy company with still a lot of energy and gas, oil and gas, a energy-intensive fabric with huge investments that, they counted on to still function for, like, for instance, 50 years or anything like that. That, of course, is difficult because you have to shift your investments, but you can. It's what we call hybrid business models. So if you have a company that is, well, with all fairness, a company of the past, you have to shift. Then you have to make sure that the majority of your investments are in the new, so are in innovative, sustainable solutions. And you indeed see that happening. But it has to happen on a large scale. And unfortunately, we're still in the situation, and this is really horrible, but if you look at, for instance, listed passive investment funds, I'm very sorry to say, but still tobacco and oil and gas perform really well, which is a disaster. And they won't in time, because that will decline quite quickly, but we're not past that tipping point yet. Okay, solar energy, wind energy become cheaper and cheaper, and they beat fossil energy by now, but the funds still perform well, unfortunately. This is shifting rapidly, and COVID-19 is indeed, again, a wake-up call, as is the climate changing rapidly, as is all the storms we're confronted with. I read an article that in the Pacific, they have, in this year, they have so many storms that normally they have by the end of the year. So this shifts rapidly, and that wakes people up. And I see more and more awareness that we don't want to invest in old economy business. We don't want to invest in non-sustainable businesses. We want to invest in sustainable solutions. Entrepreneurs find ways to bring innovative products to the markets, and larger companies are indeed shifting, yet it must be quicker.
And I'd also like to talk about your book, The $1 Trillion Shift, which was described as the first ever business book on how businesses can unlock $12 trillion in financial opportunities that are all opened by the UN Sustainable Development Goals. But can you tell me more about this? Because again, it's an area that we don't discuss enough.
Very true, very true. And sometimes people are a bit afraid or daunted by all these goals and think, oh dear, I'm never going to be able to contribute to 17 goals, and they're intertwined and it's all complex. And one of the reasons I wrote that book is because when the Sustainable Development Goals were defined, like a zillion reports came into the world, and all by the accountants, the consultancy firms, and one was more complex than another. And of course, that is worthwhile and that is valuable if you are a specialist or you need to dive into something very specific. But the majority of people in companies or in government or consumers or whoever want to be able to read something concrete, not too complex, yet thorough, and with concrete examples. And that's why I wrote that book. It was a huge task, I might say, because I used the Sustainable Development Goals, so everything in the book needed to be perfect and correct, check, double check. But we made it, and to give you a little bit of an idea how the book is structured, in the beginning of the book, I explain how the Sustainable Development Goals came about. So very, very briefly, what happened, how did it happen, what are they, and what can you expect? And then I discuss what I mean with business for good, because that is important. I am not a person about corporate sustainable, corporate responsible, sustainable, or all that terms that are just an adaptation to the current. But I very much believe in what I called shared value business, built on the former Porter thoughts, meaning that you indeed can combine sustainability, so the SDGs impact, with a profitable business case, and that is very important, growing market opportunities, because the market for solutions that address the SDGs is huge, hence the title of the $12 trillion shift. So I explain what I mean with shared value business models, and I think that is important to people because business is business. It should make profit. It's not profitable. It's not sustainable if it's not profitable. And you can. So that's not a problem. It's not something to be ashamed about or say, oh, if you want to earn a lot of money, it's wrong. No, it's not wrong at all, as long as you have a positive impact on the SDGs. Then I talk, and this is quite a significant chapter in the book about ICT and technology, because we're now in the fourth industrial revolution. That be a revolution for good, with technology for good. But technology is the most powerful thing we have to accelerate our impact on the SDGs, because if we have drones, we can bring medicine or seeds for agriculture or anything else to places in the world where otherwise we have to build a road first, for instance, or we cannot travel there at all. We have robots that cannot be affected by COVID, for instance, so they can clean the hospitals. We have mobile communication and platforms, hence we can provide all kinds of knowledge throughout the world, also in unreachable parts, for little money. We can enable smallholder farmers in Africa to be able to do their finances. Well, I can go on for hours. Technology is an enabler for sustainability, and it should be. So I talk a lot about that, and I give huge amount of examples. Then I talk a lot about capital. Am I boring you already?
No, not at all.
So I talk a lot about capital because what you invest in will grow. And if we redirect investments, we will accelerate sustainability hugely. And it's not enough for big firms to say, or big banks, or big investments like investment companies like BlackRock, etc., to say, oh, we do 1-2%. They never say we do 1-2%. They always give the concrete numbers, because then we have an impression that it's so high. But in fact, it's very little to spend on green bonds or anything else. It must be the majority of money. Actually, it must be all money. So I talk about capital and all the parties in the financial sector as to enable not only people from that sector, but also to enable people in all other kinds of sectors to be aware what money to attract. And it's not just money, but it should be support you in the right direction. Also give some cases of companies in the financial sector. And then I go into the different domains, you could say, cities and transportation, food, agriculture, education and learning, health and well-being, and energy and resources. And in all those sectors, because I can imagine if you're reading this book and you're from one of these sectors, you want to have some insights in your own sector. Although we are in a cross-sector period, still that is a good starting point. So per sector, I give some inspiration from every single SDG, how it can apply to your sector. I explain for every sector what are the shared value business opportunities. I explain all the domains of impact in these sectors, and I give a couple of real-life business cases per sector. And then I finish the book with some thoughts about leadership, as you might expect.
And am I right in saying you've got another book, Tech for Good, coming out in autumn? How's that going? Is it all come together and ready to go?
No, it's not. It's in the making. It's in the making. It will not be out this autumn yet. It will take me another, I think, half year or so. But you're right. That is specific about technology because, like I said, the COVID period made us more aware than any time how much we can do for the better, leveraging technology for good. And also because it's so inspirational, it's so amazing, all the inventions and technologies and what we can do and how we can change the world because of it. So I identified 10 of those technologies. Let me give you an example. For instance, additive manufacturing, or in other words, 3D printing, is such a huge, a massive, you could say, transformational technology of manufacturing. But we can do much more than regular manufacturing with it. For instance, did you know that we can print coral reef using artificial intelligence and 3D printing? We can recuperate the coral reef. We can print food. We can print buildings from waste. We can print all kinds of bones in your body. But the good thing is that we can also locally print things. So you have companies that are specialized to do this in remote areas or very poor areas where people normally don't get health solutions, and now we can print them locally, etc., etc. I find it amazing to read about those technologies, and I think in this day and era, people like to be inspired in a positive way. And also it's exciting, you know, all these technological solutions are exciting. So my hope is that with this book, I inspire many, and also to make people aware that technology doesn't apply only to people in tech sectors, it applies to all sectors. And that I also want to make very clear in that book, how every single sector, be it manufacturing, traveling, production, food, whatever, every sector benefits from tech opportunities and should leverage them for good.
Absolutely. And looking towards the future, I mean, what kind of challenges do you think that female entrepreneurs will face during this global crisis? And do you have any tips on how they can come together and help support each other in these hours of need?
Oh, that is actually a difficult question. I write a lot about female rights around the world.
Yeah.
And some things really break my heart. You know, for one, of course, there's so many women with little rights around the world. And in many situations, it's so absolutely unfair. So think about smallholder farmers. The majority of farmers in developing poor countries are women. Did you know that?
No.
But most of those women don't have the right to bloody own it.
That's insane.
So, yeah, that is insane. Thanks for saying that. But so many people are not aware yet. And if we do international aid and all those things, we must bear in mind that justice for women is so important. So yeah, if you mention that topic, that is the first thing I think about. On the other hand, you know, if you look at the SDG equality, we still are very poorly on that. And, you know, we have our mouthful of women in top positions, for instance, and still we don't make that. Well, I can assure you there's enough women. So it's not a matter of being able to, but willing to get equality in boards, in management, in non-executive boards, etc. I don't have the solution, to be honest. I think we must change, and then equality will come. And that means addressing many people, business leaders, governments who have to protect women more, and culture in the end, which is the toughest thing to change, of course.
Absolutely. And I'm conscious we've covered a lot of ground in our conversation today. So people that would like to dive a little bit deeper into the subject, find out more about your written work and watch your TED Talks, etc., and maybe even contact you if they've got any questions, what's the best way of doing that?
Well, I have a personal website. That's the easiest way. Simply margahoek.com. On that website, you have a button press. You can read all the articles are gathered there, so you can read everything. You can send me a message, and you can also see the videos. The video, for instance, you just mentioned, the TED Talk, and any other thing. So I think that's the easiest way. Of course, they can connect with LinkedIn, which is also very easy.
Well, I'll add the links to the blog posts that will accompany this podcast episode. I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to come on here today and proving, because I always say at the end of every episode that technology works best when it brings people together. And I love the work that you're doing here and how technological innovations can be a huge force for good and meet those sustainability goals. And if we all change, we can all be the change that we want to see in the world. And I think it's such a powerful message. So more than anything, thank you so much for taking the time to share your journey with me.
It was my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I genuinely believe that tech works best when it brings people together, and especially in what feels like an increasingly divided world. And for those reasons, I think it's more important than ever. And like I said at the beginning of the episode, when tech is good, it's good for business and the planet, and it isn't a binary choice. Businesses can make profit by doing good. So for those reasons alone, I love everything that Marga stands for, and hope voices like hers banish apathy, polarisation, and phrases such as, but hey, we've always done it this way, and it is what it is. Because we have the power to change course at any moment. And that's one of the big takeaways that I'll be walking away with from my conversation with Marga today. But if you are on a similar journey, please, I want to hear from you. So email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. You can get me on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram @NeilCHughes. And my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. Now, I have to admit, I feel somewhat inspired after chatting with Marga today and thinking about the art of the possible if we just focused on being the change that we wanted to see in the world and leverage technology to make it happen. But before I get too cheesy and start singing, I'm going to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony. Nobody wants that. I'm going to sign off and say a big thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.